Okay, so you've probably seen the headlines flying around, right, about President Trump saying Harvard maybe shouldn't be tax exempt anymore.
Oh, yeah. Definitely caught my eye. It's one of those things that sounds pretty, well, dramatic.
Exactly. Like, what does that even mean? And it makes you wonder what's actually going on behind that headline.
For sure. And, it's not just talk. This came right after the government actually put a hold on, what was it, like $2.2 billion in federal grants for Harvard.
Yeah, a huge amount. And we've been digging into some reporting, particularly the CBS News piece, and it looks like this isn't just about the money, is it?
No, not at all. It seems to tie into bigger fights over, well, how Harvard is run and even what students are allowed to say or protest on campus.
Right. So it's this mix of finance, university rules, maybe even free speech stuff.
Absolutely. And that's what we want to unpack today in this deep dive, kind of cut through the noise and figure out, why this is happening and what the stakes really are. Maybe not just for Harvard, but for universities generally.
Okay, let's start with the tax thing. Tax exempt status. Most universities have it, right? The CBS report mentioned that the Association of American Universities says pretty much all public and private colleges get this break because they're, well, educational places.
That's the basic idea. They're seen as providing a public good education, research, that sort of thing. So the government gives them a break on taxes like property tax, income tax, stuff businesses usually pay.
It's like recognition for their mission, basically.
Exactly. A mission beyond just profit.
Okay, so Trump's questioning that mission now for Harvard. His post on Truth Social, the report quoted it, asks if Harvard is really acting in the public interest, given what he called, and this is his term, political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired supporting sickness. Pretty strong words.
Very strong. And it connects directly to that idea of public interest. He's essentially asking if the university allows views he finds unacceptable, are they still serving the public good enough to deserve that tax break?
And it feels like that's tied into the funding freeze, too, like using financial pressure, both grants and taxes, to influence Harvard's policies.
It definitely looks that way. Using the government's financial power as leverage over what happens inside the university.
But Harvard isn't just taking it, apparently. The report said they outright rejected a list of demands from the administration.
Yeah, they push back.
What kind of demands were they?
Well, the report mentioned things like changes to Harvard's leadership, getting rid of their DEI policies. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Ah, DEI. Yeah, that's been a big focus in lots of places.
It has. So the administration wanted changes there and leadership reforms.
And Harvard said no. The university president, Alan Garber, was quoted saying Harvard will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights.
That sounds pretty firm.
Very firm. It's a clear line in the sand. They're saying we're independent, we have rights, you can't just dictate terms to us. It's about that core principle of academic freedom, university autonomy.
Yeah, and there was that quote from Ryan Enos, a professor there. Right, the political scientist.
He said something like, people want to be part of a place that stands up for its principles, otherwise you don't have anything. Really hits home that this is about more than just rules for the faculty and staff.
Totally. It speaks to the identity of the university, what it stands for. If they give in on this, what does that say about their values? It suggests they see this as a fundamental fight.
So what actually sparked this whole confrontation? The report links it back to those pro-Palestinian encampments on campus last year.
Yeah, those protests, which happened at a lot of universities, really stirred things up. They raised all sorts of difficult questions about free speech, protest rules, and also, importantly, concerns about antisemitism and Islamophobia.
And the report mentioned the Trump administration started reviewing Harvard's grants back in March because of alleged anti-Semitic incidents.
That's what it said. So it seems like those campus events and how the university handled them or how the administration perceived they handled them is really central to this whole funding fight.
Okay, so that $2.2 billion freeze, what kind of impact does that actually have? Where does that federal money usually go at Harvard?
A lot of it, according to the report, fuels research, especially medical and scientific research. Harvard Medical School pointed out how federal grants were crucial for some major breakthroughs.
Like what? Did they give examples?
Yeah, they mentioned things like cancer immunotherapy, treatments for diabetes and obesity, therapies for autoimmune diseases, even that new gene editing therapy for sickle cell disease. Really significant stuff.
Wow. Okay, so that's not just lab work. That's research with potentially huge real-world health impacts.
Exactly. And that work could be disrupted now.
And Professor Enos, he talked about the immediate chaos too, right? Like researchers just suddenly couldn't do their work.
Yeah, he said one day they're doing research and then the next day they can't. And beyond just stopping current work, he mentioned the problem with planning. You can't plan future research if the funding is suddenly uncertain.
That must be incredibly difficult for the scientists involved. Just pulls the rug out from under them.
Hugely disruptive. Research takes long-term planning, funding stability. This kind of freeze throws all of that into question. It can make it hard to keep projects going, hard to keep talented people.
Now, we've heard Harvard's perspective, the faculty perspective, but the report also included someone with a different take, Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Right, a Harvard grad who campaigned for Trump.
And he felt this penalty was, quote, long overdue. He talked about Harvard having a track record of discrimination and violating the civil rights of students. That's a really different view.
It is, and it brings in the argument that, from his perspective, Harvard hasn't managed these campus issues well, hasn't protected student rights adequately, maybe specifically around the conflict debates. He sees this financial pressure as justified.
It really shows how divided opinions are on how universities are handling these really sensitive campus climate issues.
Definitely. There's no easy consensus.
And then there's the elephant in the room, Harvard's endowment. It was over, what, $53 billion last year?
Yeah.
Massive. So it makes you ask, why does an institution that wealthy even need federal money?
That's a fair question, and the article kind of gets into it. That endowment, while huge, isn't just a giant checking account. A lot of it is restricted, meaning it's designated for specific things, scholarships, certain professor salaries, building upkeep, things like that.
Ah, okay, so it's not all flexible cash.
Right. Federal grants often fund very specific research projects that might not be covered by the endowment funds. Professor Enos actually acknowledged the point, saying there's some truth to the idea that Harvard is wealthy, but that's why they need to fight this battle. He said Harvard is digging in for battle.
Suggesting they see both funding streams, the endowment, and federal grants as vital?
Seems like it. They need both to operate the way they do, especially with that level of research.
Okay, wow. There are so many angles to this. And just a quick reminder, as always, our aim here is just to lay out what the reporting, like that CBS News piece, is telling us.
Exactly. We're not taking political sides, left or right, just trying to understand the situation based on the available information.
Right, giving you the context. So summing up, Trump's threatening Harvard's tax-exempt status. There's already billions in federal funding frozen. Harvard's refusing demands about its policies and leadership likely linked to those campus protests from last year.
And that freeze could hit really important scientific research hard. Plus, you have different views on whether Harvard deserves this pressure, especially given its huge endowment.
It really opens up these much larger questions, doesn't it, about, the government's role with universities, how much independence they should have versus public accountability.
Yeah, and navigating things like free speech versus campus safety. It's incredibly complex.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. Considering that massive private wealth Harvard has, what is the right balance between that private money, the public funding they receive, and their duty to serve the public interest? Not just for Harvard, but for all big universities like it.
It's a tough question, and probably one we'll keep seeing debated. Definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.